I don't rightly know, Karate Man, but the way things are going to hell in a handbasket, we'd better figure it out pretty quick. Mark was going up a hill and had an odd feeling about it. When he got to the top, he recognized why. This was the spot where they had finished burning the bodies on Wednesday, but things had changed. The rain was quite heavy now, and he'd had to look twice to make sure he wasn't seeing things. The small car turned funeral pyre had been pushed into the ditch, and the other cars were now blocking the road. Mark slammed on the brakes and skidded sideways a little as he stopped. Gunny was immediately on the radio, telling the other drivers they might have a problem. Mark put the Jeep in reverse and backed up beyond the crest of the hill to where they were out of the line of fire from the potential attack. No one had fired at them, and neither of them had seen anyone manning the obstacle, but Mark wanted to check it out thoroughly before he put his men or his vehicles at risk. He and Gunny slipped out of the Jeep and crawled to where they could see the roadblock. Mark looked through his binoculars for a minute and announced that he couldn't see anyone. He handed the field glasses to Gunny. The older man fought with the focus adjustment for a second and then took several moments scanning the obstacle. When he handed the glasses back to Mark, he confirmed that no one was visible. He also informed his companion that there was smoke coming from the chimney of a farmhouse about 500 yards past the other side of the bridge. Did you notice any signs that the house was inhabited on Wednesday? Gunny asked. No, but that doesn't really mean anything. I suspect that most people who live out in the country are trying to keep a low profile, Mark observed. Maybe so, but somebody pushed those cars out in the road, and I can't think of a good reason why some farmer out in the middle of nowhere would want to do that, especially if he was trying to keep a low profile. What do you want to do? Mark asked the combat vet. Gunny ran the options, and the two men weighed each one. The best solution seemed to be to have two men sneak down to the roadblock and make sure it was unmanned while the others covered them. Then, if possible, for them to push one of the cars off the road far enough for the convoy to pass. Gunny radioed for the other four vehicles to move up behind the Jeep. When everyone was there, the old sergeant filled them in and asked for volunteers to scout the prospective trouble spot. Manny, Victor, Mark, and Rob each had a hand in the air as soon as the request was made. Gunny looked at the men and picked Victor and Rob for the op. You can't send him, Mark objected as he looked at Rob. He's our guest. And he's also the most qualified, Gunny said. After you disappeared last night, I got to talk with him for a while. He was with the San Antonio Police Department on their SWAT team, so he knows how to handle himself in this type of situation. Gunny turned to Rob. Here's the radio. If the cars are empty, try to push one off the road. If you can't, radio up and we'll send the red truck down to do it while you cover it. At the first sign of trouble, get back here while we cover you. Any questions? Piece of cake, Rob said. You ready, Victor? He waited for his partner to nod. Let's rock. The two men started down the hill. Rob had Victor follow about 5 yards behind him. Mark noticed that he stayed in the ditch and jogged slightly bent over to keep his outline as inconspicuous as possible. The rain, though not as hard as before, was still coming down steadily. Mark was glad he had a good raincoat. He looked at what the other men were wearing. Gunny had an old GI poncho on. Some of the men had various types of jackets on, and a couple had on garbage bags that they'd cut holes for their arms and neck in. Gunny told Mark to keep his binoculars up and watch both the cars and the house for any sign of movement. Fortunately, he didn't see any. When the two men reached the blockade, they quickly looked the cars over and radioed up that all was clear. Then they easily pushed the smaller car onto the shoulder. Gunny had everyone load up and move out. The 5 vehicles stopped momentarily at the bridge to pick up the 2 men who were waiting there. Gunny told the convoy to stay together until they topped the next hill and then to start spacing out into their normal formation. When the Jeep passed the house with the smoking chimney, Mark noticed that there were 6 or 8 motorcycles and a couple of trucks under the carport. He pointed them out to Gunny. They watched the house for any sign of life, but nothing was moving. After a few miles, the convoy had spread back out, and Mark continued his conversation with Gunny about their neighborhood security. Mark told Gunny about what had happened with his carbine the night before. Gunny explained to Mark that while the Camp 45 was a fine little weapon, it wasn't designed like a military weapon. Shoot, if you want something that'll work like when it's dirty, you ought to carry one of them AKs. I think you could bury one of them things in a mud hole for a week and it'd still shoot every time you pulled the trigger, he said. I'm also worried about our ability to effectively fight in the dark, Mark said. I could aim with my red dot, but not that it did me much good after my rifle jammed, but the other guys couldn't see their sights for squat. That is a problem. We could try and get some of them red dots like you got and put them on some of the rifles, but what are we going to do once the batteries run out? I don't know. I know they make tritium sights for pistols. The Watson boys are real big on them. Maybe they make the same thing for rifles. That's them radioactive glow sights, right? Gunny asked. Something like that. I know they're supposed to last like 10 or 12 years. When we get back, maybe we should run down to town and see if Jerry has any. Sounds like a plan to me. You want some coffee? Mark nodded his head, and Gunny poured 2 cups of the liquid gold out of his thermos. He handed one to Mark and then took a sip of his, and then made a sound that let Mark know that the warm nectar had the desired effect. Mark tasted his and found it especially satisfying. The conversation turned to the county militia the sheriff wanted to train. Gunny and Mark agreed they should dedicate 1 day a week to the cause, even if it hurt the training of their own men. Having a large county-wide group to deal with problems could be very beneficial. If it stopped trouble before it got to them, well, there was no way to put a value on that. It would be a monumental task, though. Mark couldn't imagine how the sheriff could effectively train so many men. Gunny suggested that Kurt already had a plan and only needed some help to do it. Why do you say that? Mark asked him. Look at how well he and those guys in that Promise Point subdivision were ready for the stuff to hit the fan. He had to have some kind of contingency plan for something like this. Then why wouldn't he just have told us what he wants to do? Think about it, Karate Man. What does he do for a living? He's a sheriff. How did he get to be sheriff? The people voted for him, Mark said, failing to see where Gunny was going. And how did he get the people to vote for him? What has that got to do with what we're talking about? Mark asked. You know, Karate Man, your heart's in the right place, but you better learn to engage that gray matter between your ears sometimes. He's a damn politician. He got elected by getting people to think that he'd do what they want him to do. He's doing the same thing now. If he insisted he was going to do things a certain way, people might oppose him. So he gets them to think that it's their idea. You think so? I'm sure of it. And you should take a lesson from him on how to handle things like this. It might have made things go smoother with John.